Have you ever wondered why God would destroy nearly all of humanity with a flood? The Sunday school version tells us it was because of human wickedness. But what if I told you there's a darker, more terrifying truth hidden in the shadows of Genesis? What if the real reason for the flood wasn't just human sin, but something far more disturbing? Something so unnatural and abominable that it threatened the very fabric of creation itself. Tonight we're going to uncover the forbidden story of the Nephilim, the giant offspring of fallen angels who walked the earth before the flood, and discover why their existence was so dangerous that God had to wipe the slate clean. This isn't the sanitized version you heard in church. This is the story they don't want you to know. The ancient secret that reveals just how close humanity came to losing its soul forever. In the dim corridors of ancient memory, before the waters rose to swallow the world, there existed beings that should never have been born. The book of Genesis speaks of them in whispers, in verses that most preachers skip over, afraid of the implications they carry. Chapter 6, verses 1 through 4, tells us that the sons of God saw the daughters of men and took them as wives, and from these unholy unions came the Nephilim giants, in the earth mighty men of old men of renown. But who were these sons of God, and what made their offspring so terrible that the Creator himself decided that only a worldwide catastrophe could cleanse the earth of their presence? The Hebrew word Nephilim comes from the root naphal, meaning to fall, and these were indeed the fallen ones, not just in the sense of moral corruption, but as literal descendants of angels who had abandoned their heavenly stations to corrupt the human bloodline. If you're someone who has ever felt that there are deeper mysteries hidden within the pages of Scripture, mysteries that the mainstream church seems reluctant to explore, then I want you to know that you've found a place where these forgotten truths are brought into the light. Subscribe to this channel if you're ready to journey beyond the surface of biblical stories and discover the profound, sometimes disturbing realities that lie beneath. Here, we don't shy away from the darkness that exists alongside the light, because it's only by understanding both that we can truly comprehend the magnitude of God's plan and the spiritual warfare that surrounds us every day. The ancient book of Enoch, removed from most biblical canons but quoted by the Apostle Jude himself, provides us with chilling details about what really happened in those antediluvian days. According to this ancient text, 200 angels, led by their chief Semjaza, descended upon Mount Hermon and made a pact to take human women as wives. These weren't ordinary angels, but the Watchers, beings assigned to observe humanity, but forbidden from interacting with them in such intimate ways. They taught forbidden knowledge to mankind, revealing secrets of metallurgy, astronomy, cosmetics, and warfare that humanity wasn't meant to possess. Azazel taught men to make weapons and taught women to beautify themselves with ornaments and paint. Barachel taught astrology, Kokabel the constellations, Chazakiel the knowledge of clouds, Arakiel the signs of the earth, Shamsiel the signs of the sun, and Sariel the course of the moon. This wasn't just cultural exchange, it was spiritual contamination on a cosmic scale. The offspring of these unions weren't merely large humans. They were something else entirely, abominations that defied the natural order. The Nephilim grew to enormous size, some traditions claiming they reached heights of 300 cubits, nearly 450 feet tall. But their physical size was the least disturbing aspect of their existence. These beings possessed supernatural strength, knowledge beyond human comprehension, and an insatiable appetite for violence and corruption. They consumed not just all the resources that humans had produced, but according to Enoch, when that wasn't enough, they began to devour humanity itself. The text describes how they turned against mankind, eating human flesh and drinking blood, becoming cannibalistic monsters that terrorized the earth. Their very existence was a violation of the divine order, a mixing of the spiritual and physical realms that God had deliberately kept separate. As these giants multiplied and their influence spread, the corruption they brought wasn't limited to physical violence. They began to corrupt the very genetic code of life itself. The fallen angels and their Nephilim offspring didn't just destroy human civilization, they began to corrupt all flesh that was upon the earth. Ancient texts speak of genetic manipulation, of the creation of hybrid creatures that were part human, part animal, abominations that violated every boundary God had established in creation. This wasn't just moral corruption. This was biological warfare against the image of God in humanity. The bloodline through which the promised Messiah was to come was being systematically polluted and destroyed. If this corruption had continued, there would have been no pure human line left through which salvation could enter the world. Now, I want you to think about something. Have you ever felt like there are forces at work in our world that seem beyond human comprehension? Powers and principalities that operate behind the scenes of history? If you believe that spiritual warfare is real, and that understanding these ancient mysteries helps us recognize the patterns of deception and corruption that persist even today, I want you to copy and paste this exact phrase in the comments. The watchers are still watching. Your engagement helps keep these forgotten truths alive and reminds others that they're not alone in seeking deeper understanding of the spiritual realm that surrounds us. God's response to this catastrophic corruption reveals something profound about his nature that many modern believers struggle to understand. The decision to flood the earth wasn't made in anger, but in profound sorrow. Genesis tells us that it grieved God to his heart that he had made man. The Hebrew word for grieved here, atzab, carries the meaning of deep emotional pain, almost like the anguish of a parent watching their child destroy themselves. But this wasn't just about human sin anymore. It was about the preservation of humanity itself. The flood wasn't just judgment. It was rescue, a desperate measure to save what remained of uncorrupted human DNA before it was completely lost forever. Noah wasn't chosen randomly. The text tells us he was perfect in his generations, which many ancient commentators understood to mean his genetic line remained pure, uncontaminated by the Nephilim corruption. The waters that rose to cover the highest mountains weren't just H2O. They represented something far more profound in the spiritual realm. In ancient cosmology, water often symbolized the primordial chaos from which God brought order in creation. The flood was essentially a return to that pre-creation state, a cosmic reset button that would allow God to begin again with humanity. But even as the waters rose, something sinister was happening. The spirits of the dead Nephilim, according to the Book of Enoch, didn't simply cease to exist. Unlike human spirits that go to rest when the body dies, these hybrid beings had a different fate. Their spirits became what we know as demons, disembodied entities that would continue to plague humanity throughout history, seeking to possess and corrupt the human vessels they could no longer inhabit naturally. The flood waters themselves tell a story of divine precision that reveals God's intimate knowledge of genetics and biology. The text says, "The waters prevailed 15 cubits above the highest mountains." Why 15 cubits specifically? Some ancient traditions suggest this was the exact depth needed to ensure that even the tallest of the giants would be completely submerged, their massive bodies unable to survive even if they climbed to the highest peaks. But more than that, the duration of the flood, exactly 1 year and 10 days, corresponds to a complete cleansing cycle, allowing time for all corrupted genetic material to be thoroughly purged from the earth. The ark itself becomes a symbol of preservation, carrying not just representatives of each kind of animal, but serving as a genetic repository to restart creation with pure, uncorrupted life forms. When Noah and his family finally emerged from the ark onto dry ground, they entered a world that had been completely sterilized of the Nephilim corruption. But the story doesn't end there. And this is where it becomes truly unsettling. The Bible tells us that Nephilim appeared again after the flood. Numbers chapter 13 describes the spies returning from the Promised Land, reporting that they saw the descendants of Anak there, giants who made them feel like grasshoppers in comparison. How could this be possible if the flood had destroyed all the Nephilim? The answer lies in a disturbing truth that most biblical scholars avoid discussing. Either some of the corrupted genetic material survived through one of the human lineages that entered the ark, possibly through Ham's wife, according to some traditions, or the fallen angels repeated their transgression after the flood, once again taking human wives and producing giant offspring. The presence of giants in the Promised Land wasn't coincidental. These beings were strategically placed by dark spiritual forces to prevent God's people from claiming their inheritance. The Anakim, the Emim, the Rephaim, the Zamzumim, all these giant clans mentioned throughout the Old Testament were the post-flood descendants of the original Nephilim, genetically programmed to oppose God's plan for humanity. When God commanded the Israelites to completely destroy these peoples, showing no mercy to men, women, or children, it wasn't arbitrary cruelty. It was genetic warfare, the continuation of the same battle that had necessitated the flood in the first place. The command to utterly destroy these hybrid populations was about preserving the human genome and ensuring that the messianic line remained pure. David's victory over Goliath takes on profound new meaning when understood in this context. This wasn't just a shepherd boy defeating a warrior. It was the ultimate confrontation between the pure human line and the corrupted Nephilim bloodline. Goliath stood over 9 feet tall, wore armor weighing 150 pounds, and carried a spear whose head alone weighed 15 pounds. But more than his physical size, Goliath represented the last great champion of the pre-flood corruption, the final attempt by dark forces to prevent God's plan of redemption from moving forward. David's smooth stone, guided by divine providence, didn't just kill a giant, it struck down the ancient enemy that had threatened humanity since the days before the flood. The deeper horror of the Nephilim story lies not just in their physical dominance, but in their spiritual legacy. These beings possessed knowledge that corrupted every aspect of human civilization. The technologies they introduced, the religious practices they established, the systems of government and warfare they created, all were designed to lead humanity away from their Creator and into spiritual bondage. The ancient ziggurats, the megalithic structures found around the world, the sophisticated astronomical knowledge possessed by primitive cultures, all bear the fingerprints of this forbidden angelic instruction. Even today, some researchers suggest that certain technologies and knowledge systems may trace back to these ancient fallen angel teachings, hidden within secret societies and occult traditions that have been passed down through generations. The Gnostic texts provide additional disturbing details about the nature of these hybrid beings. According to the Apocryphon of John and other early Christian writings, the Nephilim weren't just physically corrupt, they were spiritually void, lacking the divine spark that makes humans capable of redemption. They were biological machines, created by spiritual forces of darkness to serve as vessels for demonic consciousness. This is why they could never be saved, why mercy was never an option for them, and why complete destruction was the only solution. They represented a corruption so fundamental that it threatened the very possibility of human salvation. Their continued existence would have made the incarnation of Christ impossible, because there would have been no pure human line for the Word to become flesh within. The psychological warfare these beings waged against early humanity was perhaps even more devastating than their physical violence. They presented themselves as gods, demanding worship and sacrifice, establishing the pagan religious systems that would plague humanity for millennia. The pantheons of ancient mythologies, the gods of Egypt, Babylon, Greece, and Rome. Many scholars believe these were distorted memories of the Nephilim and their fallen angel fathers. They taught humanity to see themselves as nothing more than playthings of capricious deities, removing the understanding of humanity's true identity as beings created in God, His image with eternal souls and divine purpose. This spiritual amnesia was perhaps their greatest weapon, convincing humans to forget their divine heritage and accept slavery to forces that had no right to rule over them. The flood becomes not just a historical event, but a cosmic intervention that saved humanity from complete spiritual annihilation. Without this drastic reset, the knowledge of the true God would have been completely lost, buried under layers of false religion and demonic deception. Noah's preservation of the animals wasn't just about maintaining biodiversity. It was about preserving the original creation template, the pure genetic designs that God had established in the beginning. The rainbow that appeared after the flood wasn't just a promise that God wouldn't destroy the earth by water again. It was a covenant sign that the genetic integrity of creation would be maintained, that the mixing of dimensions that had led to the Nephilim corruption would not be permitted to reach such devastating levels again. Yet the warning remains. Jesus himself said that as it was in the days of Noah, so it would be at the coming of the Son of Man. People were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, unaware of the judgment that was coming. But could there be a deeper meaning to these words? Some believe that the end times will see a return of the conditions that necessitated the flood, a new attempt by fallen angels to corrupt humanity through genetic manipulation and hybrid creation. The modern obsession with genetic engineering, artificial intelligence, and the merging of human and machine consciousness may be laying the groundwork for a final corruption that will dwarf even the antediluvian horrors. The story of the forbidden children of angels isn't just ancient history, it's a warning about the ongoing spiritual battle for the human soul. The same forces that corrupted the pre-flood world continue to work today, seeking to separate humanity from their divine heritage and reduce them to something less than what God intended. The floodwaters have receded, but the war between light and darkness, between pure human nature made in God's image and the corrupted alternatives offered by fallen powers, continues to rage. Understanding this ancient catastrophe helps us recognize the patterns of deception and corruption that persist in our own time, reminding us that the stakes in this spiritual warfare are nothing less than the future of humanity itself. As you reflect on these revelations, remember that the same God who grieved over the corruption of the pre-flood world, who made the difficult decision to cleanse the earth for the sake of humanity's future, is the same God who offers redemption and protection to those who seek him today. The Nephilim may have been beyond salvation, trapped by their hybrid nature in spiritual limbo, but you are not. You bear the image of God, you possess a soul that can be redeemed, and you have access to the same divine protection that preserved Noah and his family through the waters of judgment. The ancient mysteries reveal not just the depths of spiritual darkness, but also the incredible lengths to which divine love will go to preserve and restore what is precious to the heart of the Creator.